Chris, thank you so much for being on Full Focus, joining me on this podcast today. And, I was researching you, and you had a very interesting career up until to this point. And we're going to get into all of that. But I also looked up where you're from originally. And you're from a city called Norman, Oklahoma, which is like a suburb of Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
It's a small town, but yet it's the third largest city in Oklahoma.
Wow, I'm impressed. I didn't even know that.
I knew that because I looked it up. It's over 110,000 people live there, I think, which is still relatively small. But tell me a little bit about that. How was it growing up in Norman?
Well, I mean, Norman is we always joke that we knew we were finally had arrived there because there's a water tower. So a lot of people just thought there wasn't a lot of people there, so they thought, oh, okay, there's the water tower. It's a water tower named Norman, but they wouldn't necessarily think it was a town. But Truthfully, what Norman's famous for is you might be familiar with the football team, the Oklahoma Sooners. Mm-hmm. So the University of Oklahoma is in Norman, and I'm still not sure how we were kidnapped and landed and grew up and born and raised in Norman and Oklahoma, but Oklahoma's pretty awesome. Yeah. Even though the license plates just say Oklahoma's okay.
What's the entertainment industry like there? I mean, how did you even get interested in wanting to pursue this line of business?
That's a great question. I don't know. There wasn't a lot to do but watch TV. I was always fascinated by television. My stepmother at the time ran production for the public television network, I think. And I remember maybe when I was very young, I have a very vague memory of kind of going to visit the TV station. Mm-hmm. And I just became enamored with TV and TV stations to the point of building model TV stations out of Legos and programming my own schedules. My first job in television was in Norman for the community access when I was like 12 or 13 years old for the city council meetings. Okay. And I was directing. It was cool because half the city council people would fall asleep because it was so boring. And so you'd, of course, make sure you punch those cameras up on the air, and they'd be like, when I'm sleeping, you're not supposed to put me on the air. But when I was 14, I started working at the NBC affiliate running camera for the morning news before school. And then my first job that lasted a long time was being a producer, editor, camera person at a show that's still that's on to this day. But yes, there's actually real production in Oklahoma. I mean, The Watchmen, the series on HBO is set there. People diss Oklahoma, but people will be surprised at how many talented people there are there.
So how did you then, what was your breakthrough? Like, when did you make the move and then get your first big gig, I guess?
Well, I think you have to kind of zoom in on your specialty, and the thing I was obsessed with was editing and engineering, and became an editor and a writer on this fishing show, again, that's still on, called the Jimmy Houston Outdoor Show. Became really obsessed with editing in nature and then visual effects and design. And but what I really wanted to do was run a network. And it's kind of hard to run a network if you're just an editor. And I would take my vacations and go to Los Angeles and freelance as an editor at NBC. And working at NBC was my dream. And after a short time, I was like, as much as I love Miami, I've got to go try this. They offered me a job to go work for the promo department. Right. And that was the big break, because at that point, I was like, instead of just editing, can I write these promos and can I make my own graphics and just produce my own? And they're like, well, you're a union editor. Not really. If you want to do it in the middle of the night, you can. Right. But they let me do it, and didn't know what I was doing. I was like 21, had no idea barely what a promo was. And my first promo ever was for a show called Laugh-In, which was big in the 60s and 70s. It was a big anniversary special, and it aired in the Super Bowl. My first promo aired in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, my career's gone downhill since then because I've never had anything ever produced. My company produced a spot that aired in the Super Bowl a few years ago, but me personally, my first and last promo ever was Super Bowl, so it's deteriorated since then.
That's a pretty big audience there for you at the Super Bowl. And so you wrote and edited your own work at that time?
Yeah, that was the difference. Now they have these phrases called you're a predator, producer-editor. And back in those days, every edit suite looked like this control room with big tape machines, and you had to have pretty much an engineering background and be very, very technical. It wasn't in the age of Avid and desktop video. So the idea of trying to do both was unique. Now most producers in the marketing promotion world are predators. You can't, you have to have multi-skills. Back then it was kind of unusual.
So you're the original predator.
Well, I'm sure there was somebody before me, but I certainly was one of the originals. I would say at a network. Right. If you're at a local station, which is a wonderful trading place, and I was a producer editor at many jobs, but at a national network, I think I was one of the first predators.
Right. It's really, if you want to make it in this business, it's imperative that you have all these different skills: writing, producing, directing, editing, just having all this information on how to do all these different little things. I mean, how important is that, do you think, today? Are we still in an age today where you can say, you know what, I'm only an editor, I'm only a producer, I'm only a director? Is that something that's maybe fading out a little bit?
I think you're right. Still specialization means something at the very, very highest level. If you're a trailer editor in Hollywood, those guys can make $350,000 to $500,000 a year because they're just such specialists and ultra high level. Or if you're an incredibly high level DP or a design compositor, if you're extremely high level, and a true specialist at the highest echelon of your craft, you don't maybe need to know After Effects or Pro Tools or how to, use an Alexa. But increasingly, as video has become, I always say it like MIDI, it's become democratized where, YouTube, you can create your own, or what you're doing here. I think it's much better to have multiple skills, but the skills aren't just technical. The skills that really matter are the idea to know how to relate to people, to understand relationships, to know how to build confidence. The soft skills, I still think, are even more important than the technical skills.
You went on to hold some high-level executive positions along the way at USA, at TLC. You were head of, I think, VP of production at TLC, right? Worked at the creative director.
You're like a human LinkedIn, man.
No,
you're impressive.
Yeah, but I just read it. Yeah, give me 72 hours, I'll forget all of this.
Okay.
But right now, it's in my mind. You're also the creative director at NBC Entertainment. What does it take to come up with ideas or recognize ideas that will resonate with an audience? Like, what do you look for?
You're asking for, I think, people's most important commodity, and it's not money, it's time. And people are bombarded all the time with messages, and you're like, how can I stand out? So we really try to drill down and think about what is the unique premise here? What is something that's going to grab you? And different things are going to grab different people. So in a given series, you got to think about who's using that platform, whether it's Instagram or whether it's Snap or whether it's broadcast, who's using that, and then really tailoring the message to, it used to be demographics, right? But now you're literally tailoring it to almost specific individuals, Well, the fact that there's, for a Netflix series, there may be 40 pieces of just individual art, and it's served up differently depending on who the algorithms say is watching it. That's a huge difference.
No, for sure. And when let's say you are at TLC, and there's a show like Trading Spaces. I think that one of the shows that you were involved with at the very early stages.
Yeah, I joined TLC right after that show had launched, and it was a kind of an accident, and it became this incredible machine, and it inspired an entire movement, including maybe one of your series here.
What do you mean it was an accident?
Well, it was as I recall, it was a British format, and they, as an experiment, it's a very inexpensive show, and so they tried 5 episodes, and they placed them all in the afternoon at like 4 o'clock. It was a very simple premise. It's like 24 hours, $3,000, and you're going to basically do a room swap. Really simple, incredibly inexpensive, and they just put the show on there, not even in prime time, just the middle of their daytime block, and it just blew up. And that's often what happens is you put all these money and energy behind something, but it's the accidents that you don't expect. And that show became a frigging phenomenon. I mean, if you remember back 15 years ago, it was massive. And I say the only thing that killed it was kind of redefine it was Extreme Home Makeover. I'll never forget. We had just done the $100,000 live Trading Spaces, and we thought that was a big deal. It was the highest rated cable entertainment program of the year, and the next week ABC introduces Extreme Home Makeover, and all of a sudden now they're doing $1 million makeover.
Right.
Our little
On
live
steroids,
show.
yeah.
And so this kind of went on for a few more years, but it spawned so many spin-offs. But again, it was a tiny little show, and you look at what that show at the time cost. It's interesting. Those designers only made, like, as I recall, like $3,000 an episode, and it would take them 2 to 3 days to shoot, plus travel, plus all the prep of the project, and the series budget by that, which pretty low. It was like maybe $125,000. But for what that show cost and the repeat value, I mean, it was $125,000 all in, and the revenue it was generating for the network was massive. So that's what happens now is, like, you see a show like House Hunters, which maybe costs, I don't know, $150,000 an episode maybe. I don't work there, but I would imagine. And it generates 4 times the audience of some gigantic scripted show that costs $4 or $5 million an episode. So that's why it kind of fed this reality boom. And that's, you look at these networks like HGTV. They're a top 5 network, and it's all inexpensive programming. When you're asking the new generation, is that you look at the amount of views and the amount of popularity of YouTube shows that look like they were produced out of somebody's basement for $5 because they are. And their popularity and their stickiness and their engagement is beyond shows that cost millions and millions of dollars. It's just all changed.
The boom and explosion of reality TV was really because of the inexpensive way of producing something like that, and people wanting to see it. They love that, right? So networks and they're like give us more of this.
And it was a marketing dream, right? I mean, it's like we're now on almost the joke in broadcast is like, except for The Masked Singer. I mean, that's the only new breakout reality show since 2011, which was The Voice. Now, when I joined, I started in reality around 2000, just at the launch of Survivor. And you remember every reality show was like a crazy, like Joe Millionaire or Amazing Race, or, I mean, The Bachelor and The Bachelorette is strong, but most reality shows that are on today have been on their legacy, 15 years, 30 year seasons of Survivor. But back then it was like a show called Mr. Personality where everybody would be behind a mask or people competing for somebody's will, or it was, every idea was more outrageous. The Apprentice, and it was new and fresh. And then they became kind of parodies themselves, and it's now become about premium scripted drama. So TV is cyclical. It just changes. But reality was, you're right. It was, and even though it got expensive, I mean, Survivor, when I worked on Survivor, it was over $1 million an episode, but still compared to $3 million for a show that was doing or a third of the rating, it was a great deal.
Right. And we're not even talking about, let's say, some of the Housewife franchises or the Kardashians, where you literally, like, you have an outline and you have a scenario, you throw up some lights, you have a few cameras going, and you shoot a scene, and who cares if it's blown out in the background a little bit? It's just real because it's reality. And that's even less expensive than just Survivors. I
mean, those shows, at this point, they put a lot of production value behind it, but you're right. But now, just like you look at what's being produced on YouTube and what can be produced with incredibly smaller footprint and an incredibly smaller budget, and it still resonates because of just what you said. It looks real and authentic and curated, and some of this stuff is becoming so overly produced that people look at it and they don't believe it's real, or they just accept that it's kind of a joke.
Right.
I think the interesting, the earliest example I can think of this was, you remember The Simple Life with Paris Hilton?
Yeah, of course. And Nicole Richie.
Richie, yeah. I mean, now, it's like, that was the forerunner of the Kardashians. Can you imagine? Remember what a phenomenon that was? That was, 18 years ago?
Yeah, I remember it. That was almost like the start of that genre of
People
reality.
could be famous for having no talent or they weren't famous.
Yes.
And now it's like everybody gets their 15 minutes. But back then it was like, the criticism was like, why would anybody watch her? What has she done? It's like, well, look at the Kardashians. And it's not about the TV show. That's just a base. It's about the social media and the fact that they can get $300,000 for sending out one post on Instagram, like during the Fire Festival. It's like, the world has changed.
Yeah, man, for sure. And then you eventually left all that and you started your own thing with 2C Media with your wife. And you kind of picked up on that. You continued the development of show ideas and pitching them to the networks. Like, what was the ratio like, I wonder, for your development team to come up with ideas, concepts, pitch it, and then, Swamp Wars would get picked up? How many concepts didn't get picked up, How does that
that's
must
a good
it's
question.
pretty it's probably pretty competitive in that.
Oh yeah,
I would
you
imagine.
strike out. I mean, you strike out. If you're at bat 27 for 27 innings and you hit one, you get even on base. That's impressive. I mean, in our world, the number that is thrown. I heard a very interesting number from the guy who he was telling the story of how he Scout Productions when they pitched Queer Eye. And he said at this point, he was describing like we take out 70 pitches a year that we flush out. And then maybe out of those, we get 15 where there's 20%, 15%, where there's a kind of, you may get a development deal, which is let's flush it out, maybe put something a little on tape. You generally these days have to walk in with pretty flushed out. You can't sell paper anymore unless you're a big name. You have to tape. And then out of those 70, maybe you'll get 3 or 4 like presentation pilots, which may be presentation used to be a stripped down pilot. Basically now it means we're going to expect a pilot, but we want it for the price of presentation. And maybe out of that you get 2 series to air, and that takes 18 months. So for us, I think our ratio might have been at the height of this like 10 to 15 to 1, but it's gotten a lot harder to sell because it's a lot harder to break out, and the networks, they don't control the world anymore. The gatekeepers are not just the broadcasting cables, there's the OTT. So, 10 to 1, 15 to 1, that was our batting average. And if it just takes one, and even if the shows we created were good second and third base, we never created a home run hit. But
what do you consider a home run hit?
A home run hit is where it becomes part of the cultural literacy. It becomes part of the conversation. They can be a franchise, like you said, Housewives that go on for years and years. Our two of our most successful series went 3 seasons, 26 episodes, and they were successful.
Which one were those?
Airport, 24/7 Miami, Swamp Wars. That was a different time. So, but these days, I mean, you even look at like shows on the Netflix is like. It's becoming like the OTTs only average like 2 or 3 seasons and maybe 10 episodes apiece.
Right.
But it used to be like, broadcast and cable, an average hit lasts 7 to 8 years. And then you had shows like, the longest running show on television right now, entertainment, what is it? It's The Simpsons. It's 30 years now.
See, I didn't know that. Yeah.
30 years. And the longest running. And the fact that Survivor is in... it's 19 years ago, but it's 30 seasons. That's an incredible 30 because they do it twice a year. That's an incredible amount of cycles.
Right. A run. Yeah.
For a franchise, and it's not. And when Survivor was on the air, in that first iteration, those first 2 seasons, I went to work at CBS for the third. That was all people talked about that summer. That show attracted, on its finale, like 40 or 50, 60 million viewers.
Wow.
And now, if you look at the fall season, and that show was, I don't remember what the demo was like, but it's like if you look at how much television has changed, it's like that show probably does, I think maybe 6 or 7 million viewers versus 50 or 60. Wow. Yeah. Still profitable, still a history, but here's the number that's shocking about how much it's changed. In the opening season of the fall season, right, there's 500 scripted shows on network television. On all of streaming, network, cable broadcast. This year, this fall season, out of 46 network shows, only 20 crack a 1 rating in the 18 to 49 demo same day. That means shows a 1 rating, 5-10 years ago, you'd be canceled before you even go on the air.
Right.
And the top show on television, every week, regardless, bar none, is Sunday Night Football. That does 17 million viewers. The top entertainment show, believe it or not, terrible demos, in same day viewing, NCIS. That's been on forever. Franchise, no buzz. That's like 10, 11 million viewers. That is 10 million viewers in a country of 300.
Right.
Think about just how much. When I was at NBC, it's like ER was just a regular episode of ER and Friends was 27, 28 million viewers. That's how much it's changed.
Times be changing, man.
Times be changing.
It's everywhere now. Streaming, like we talked about earlier, YouTube. What was it? I think Time Magazine's Person of the Year a few years back was you, because it's YouTube, right? You can make your own content relatively easy. We have these cell phones now, and it's HD, and you can go and film stuff and put it up, and people love that stuff. And a lot of Generation X, even my generation, we don't even watch cable anymore. We just watch the OTTs. We watch the Apple TVs or the, whatever that is. So it's taken away from that, and it's changing, right? The traditional broadcast kind of experience. And what do people like us do? We have to adapt along the way. We have to find a way to service that part of the business now. How do you guys do that, for example?
Well, I mean, the reality is I'm still trying to figure that out. I mean, have I figured it out? I mean, no. I believe we've adapted over the years. It was only 15 years ago this month was the very first series you could ever download to an iPod, which was Grey's Anatomy and Desperate Housewives. And every time they would add a new series, it'd be like front page news. Like, how we're adapting is, is the type of content you have to produce to market is it's not about the 30-second spot anymore. It's probably more about, it's that digital piece. It's that you have to produce 10 times the assets, even more than you used to. And what is the piece that's going to be different to engage on Instagram, different on Facebook? Because the on-air promo inventory, there's less of it. You're probably skipping through it.
Right.
Half the time it's not on the OTT when it's being repeated. So
right.
You've got to find every possible iteration in which to reach people.
No, and the other thing too is when I watch Netflix shows or I go on Amazon Prime, even there, it seems like the quality is just amazing. It's super theatrical, everything. It's high budget, it feels, and I don't know the numbers exactly either, but if I'm looking at it, the average Netflix show, for example, and I look at the average Nat Geo or Animal Planet or TLC show, there's a big difference in quality there.
Well, I'd say yes and no. I mean, when Netflix first launched, it was like everything had this imprimatur, like HBO being super premium. So, look, it's true. The second or third most expensive show on television in history, I mean, Game of Thrones is the most, and I think the second is, The Crown, which I think is on Netflix. And then, of course, Amazon is going to have Lord of the Rings, I think, in 2020 or 2021. And, what is this? They're spending $18 million an episode. But, so that's what Netflix originally stood for. But because they had very few original series, like it was Kevin Spacey.
House of Cards.
House of Cards, and then there was Orange is the New Black. And they only had a few series. And so every time there was a series, it was like it was special. For them to survive, now they're producing things it's like Walmart. Yes, there is still a show like Ryan Murphy. I saw it the other night. It was amazing, gorgeous. The Politician, yet nailed it, which looks like it's produced for less than a show on Food Network.
Right.
Has a huge audience. But then there's just such a mass of just so much that you don't know if you're getting premium. You're just getting, they've become like the everything store. For instance, HBO still stands for the most part, an HBO series is going to still have that brand pedigree of it's going to be elevated or premium or special. It's going to take some risks. I think next month is when we're going to really start seeing what's been talked about for years. Like, yes, the typical TV ecosystem is changing. Some would say crumbling. I mean, DirecTV lost 1 million subscribers in last quarter.
Wow.
At the peak 4 years ago, 90% of the households had cable, DirecTV. We're now around 80 in 5 years. You can imagine how precipitously that's falling. Yeah. So, and then what starts next month is, Apple and then Disney launch the same within a week of each other in November. And then early next year, NBC's version, Peacock, and then Time Warner. And that's where those corporations are investing. They're de-investing in the actual networks and over-investing in the new services and new platforms because they want to kill. They're not going to necessarily going to kill, but they want to kill Netflix. And Netflix is judged by, it's like Tesla. They're judged by a different model. They spend a company that only 6 years ago, 6 years ago was Game of Cards, House of Cards. And that was their only original series. And they got it because they basically, no pilot commitment. They agreed it's like $100 million. We're going to do 2 seasons. Everybody thought Kevin Spacey and the production company producers were crazy. Only 6 years ago did they put their own original series. And now Netflix spends $15 to $16 billion on content. They're the third largest spender of content in the world, and it didn't exist as original content. That's exponential change. And now, Disney. I think Disney's number one, Comcast number two, and CBS Viacom are number four. So, it's really that's shocking that this company was 6 years ago was only known for DVDs and a mailer.
Right.
It's just so changed.
I forgot about that. You could get that in the mail and then mail it back, and that changed quickly.
Totally. Yeah, totally changed. Quickly. And it's like, but they don't, but the amount of debt that, Netflix is, broadcast networks and media companies, traditional ones still have to show, to the street certain amounts of margins and earnings and, price to earning performance and that's the tough thing. There's a guy, the most outspoken guy about this, who's kind of the genius of television, this guy named, I believe, John Landgraf who runs FX, but who coined the term peak TV. But he's like, we're little FX. We're backed by Fox. It's like, how do I compete with this Netflix machine where my programming budget may be only $1 billion a year. How do I compete with this monster? Right. And by the way, here's what a big difference in the change. Fox and Rupert Murdoch were the original disruptors. They were truly the first. They had Sky, Star, 20th Television, 20th Century Films. They came to the conclusion at gigantic Fox that in this new world against all these streamers, they didn't think they could compete. And so that's why 90% of that empire was sold to Disney. That is unimaginable a few years ago, because when Fox, one of the big six, and the one who's the most aggressive and probably the most disruptive, they really says, you know what, in this new age, we don't have enough scale to compete with that, and then the other things coming. And that's Netflix is what drove that acquisition and consolidation. Netflix has changed our world more than anyone.
Oh, for sure. Do you think the other big networks will follow suit with that and look at their own ways of merging with different OTT platforms and thinking, hey, we can't scale this either?
Well, I think that's what happened. I think AT&T determined that, we're selling phones and Verizon's kicking our ass, so they're like, we've got to own content. So that drove AT&T, DirecTV, and all Warner Studios together. And then NBC, Comcast. Well, the little dirty secret there is they just purchased, they tried to buy Fox. They didn't get it. What they did get was they got Sky. And I used to work at Sky. And Sky is like the European, British version. You're familiar with them. But the real the real value there is Sky was the one kind of mainstream company that figured out how to do its own OTT that compete with Netflix. So they got that entire platform, that entire playbook. And out of that acquisition, so that allows them to create Peacock, which is going to be very different. It is going to be very, very different than all the other ones, and that's the one that launches in early April. But that Netflix kind of has forced all these companies to kind of merge and consolidate.
For sure, Netflix done it to us, man.
I always joke to my son, it's like he's always like watching Netflix, even if it's a show that's on Cartoon Network, he's watching Netflix. I'm like, son, look. Would you quit watching that, because YouTube and Netflix aren't paying for your college? They're going to hurt your college education. Can you watch? Can you go watch good old Nickelodeon or Hulu? Yeah. So, look, I come out of a traditional media background, and I've had to learn to adapt to the reality, and it is changed dramatically. Cable 5 years ago was a license to print money. The margins in cable were like 50%. It has plummeted. But by the way, what do you think the margins are in Netflix? It loses insane amounts of money because it's judged on its future performance. Like Amazon, it took 20 years for them to turn a profit. So that's hard to compete with.
What do you think the advertisers are going to do? When less, like you said, the numbers used to be so much higher back then for traditional broadcast, and they've been declining. That means fewer people are watching the shows. Meaning for the advertisers, it's not as exciting.
Well, I think it's ironic is that advertisers and everybody's ratings have been falling for years, right? When there was only 3 networks, shows that were the bottom rated show of the back in when I was working in the business, that would be considered a hit now. So, but ironically, it's supply and demand. As there are fewer rating points out there, the networks have been able to actually charge more money. So it's like, I'm going to deliver you fewer viewers, but I'm still the most efficient, and I can charge more for my CPM, my cost per thousand. Now, you're asking, like, what's the future when all the new services are like not advertised supported, like Amazon and Netflix are subscription.
Right.
Well, that's where I think the genius of what NBC does. They say, if you want to know what it's going to look like, imagine the kind of advertising YouTube, pre-rolls, small ad loads, very hyper-targeted, but with, instead of just 5-minute videos, cat videos, or PewDiePie, it's going to have all the content from the NBC Universal Library. And so advertisers, that is a unique thing they can say is, we're the place now that's really advertiser friendly. Right. And that service is going to be free. It's going to be so different than the others, and I think that one's going to be really intriguing to watch.
We're not going to see the results or consequences right away. Imagine what's going to be 5-10 years down, and what impact that will have had. I mean, we don't know today. We can just speculate and try.
It's an episode of Black Mirror,
right?
It's probably pretty scary.
Well, and it's about adapting and seeing opportunities in this.
Well, I mean, look, I'm sitting here in a company called Brandstar, and I'm thinking to myself, this totally blown away and impressed by this place and by what you do. But in a sense, you guys, I think, are on the vanguard. Is because you're integrating content, advertising into content that's actually good, watchable content. And then you're thinking about, how do we leverage those brands and those contents into other things, whether, it's about, as you described, brand incubation, social media campaigns. And so you're figuring out a way to offer a full solution that is kind of DVR proof. And it's kind of like, people are not watching commercial anymore, but they are watching content. And so I think that's, when I look around at, like, what the future is, I look around, step right outside your door, walk around the studio and going, wow, these guys have a real, I had no idea when I walked here, just like what a sense you guys have where it's going.
Well, thank you. And again, like you said, we don't have the answers either. But what I know is that is something that has held true for as long as humans have been around, and that's emotion and stories and the interest in that, and the connection that you can have with empathy or relatability or whatever that case may be. And as long as I think you have that as a foundation of whatever it is you do, and find the way to integrate product services that make sense and that flow into that story, then that could be a good mix.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, you nailed it. No matter what platforms, stories matter. Yeah. Everybody still wants to tell me a story, and whether it's 5 minutes, 3 minutes, produced on an iPhone 11, or whether it's produced on a $11 million budget, it still comes down to that story, and that I don't think that'll never change. It just becomes harder and harder because the audience is more jaded. They've seen everything, and so now you see the boundaries just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and that's it's there was a line they used to say when shows would get picked up, they call it the least objectionable premise. Like, what is basically going to have the broadest appeal and offend the least amount of people and probably just be average enough. Right. Average is not great is not great enough now. You have to really stand out. Otherwise, you're just dead.
I mean, I want to know from you, like, where do you see television in, let's say, a decade from today, in 2030? What kind of conversations would we have then?
I think there's going to be more change in television in the next 5 years than there is in the last 50. And, you can already see that. But I think we're starting to get a real feel. It's not, obviously it's not just television. It's screen agnostic. So television's almost I don't even know what the word is, because television is almost derided as, that's like saying, you watch TV, even though it's a golden age of TV. Yeah,
it's like a rotary phone.
It's like a rotary phone, right? Or it's like, when you just said it, it's like I'm almost embarrassed to say I have DirecTV or cable. Right. But what I do think will be different is a lot of the brands that we've come to know, whether that's TBS or TNT or NBC, or they're going to be there, but they're going to be much more diminished in terms of, in pretty much every metric. The real investment is going into HBO Max, the new streaming service. They're going to invest less than TBS and TNT. TNT is going to still have to be on your cable system because it's the place to get some NBA games. Right. Live sports always matters. Sure. And then you're going to put some scripted work on TBS. So TBS still has some relevance. But the real spend is going to be, and the real viewing and the real hearth is going to be, there's going to be a lot more of these Netflixes and Hulus, and that's, and there's going to be fewer companies. There's going to be these fewer gatekeeper companies like CBS and Viacom are emerging, but somebody's going to come along and swallow that whole thing. So I think that's going to be I think what we're going to see in the next year, though, is going to give a pretty good roadmap of where most of your viewing. And by the same token, as we all learned, as AOL was huge in 2000, and remember Yahoo? This business eats its young and cannibalizes itself. So it's not far-fetched to believe that one of these, if people can only afford, forget your time, but just paying for 3 services, some of these won't work. Some of these won't survive. Maybe they fail. I mean, nobody would have thought AOL would have failed.
Right.
And Yahoo, I'm not saying Netflix is going to fail, but not all of them are going to succeed and last. So, and then somebody's going to come off. In our lifetime, I believe, with the next 10 years, somebody's going to come around. Like cable was disruptive. Somebody's going to come around and disrupt Netflix. And you know who I think is going to disrupt? Who's going to disrupt Netflix?
Who?
The traditional media, Disney. It's like the Empire Strikes Back, and that I think is we're going to see. That's fascinating to watch. Just like in the airline business, remember it was like, oh, the original airlines are going to die. It's going to be the JetBlues and Southwest. Well, guess what? The old school airlines that adapted and reinvented their model, they're stronger than ever.
Right.
And I think that's going to happen. I don't think nobody says that Netflix lives for 30 years. Who knows?
Well, we shall see, and maybe we'll invite you back in 10 years, and we'll see where we're at then.
Well, I've been talking for 10 years. Clearly, I have no sense of being concise or having any brevity. There's a lot to say. So I apologize that this podcast, you're going to have to do a lot of editing.
No, not at all.
Just Control-Alt-Delete. That's the editing, and drag it in the trash.
Chris, awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate your time.
No, it was fun, man.
Awesome.
You were a blast. I'm really glad to finally come up here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.